Thank you for joining us around the fire. For more information or to make a donation, please visit randomactsnetwork.com. Now, want to hear a scary story?
It was on the top shelf of an old bookcase, covered with dust and barely visible. Lisa decided she had to find out what it was. Of all the things in the old junk shop, it aroused her curiosity the most. She had looked through old books, prints, and postcards for hours. Nothing had caught her interest, but the old box, high and out of reach, intrigued her. She looked around for the old man who ran the store, but he had gone into the back room. She saw a stepladder across the room and brought it over to the bookcase. It shook on the uneven floorboards as she climbed to the top step. Lisa patted her hand along the surface of the top shelf, trying to find the box. The dirt was thick and gritty on the board. Then she felt it. The cardboard was cold and soft from being in the damp room for such a long time. She lifted the box down slowly, trying to steady her balance on the ladder. As the side of the box reached her eye level, she could read the words, 500 pieces, stepladder, and climbed down a few steps. Then she blew away some of the dust off the lid. It billowed up around her with a musty, dead odor, but now she could make out a few more words on top of the box. The strangest jigsaw puzzle in the world. There were more words underneath that, but they had been rubbed away from the cardboard lid. The big picture on the cover had been curiously damaged. Lisa could just make out some areas of light and dark. It looked as though the scene might be in a room, but most of the picture had been scratched off the cardboard box, probably with some sharp instrument. The mysterious nature of the jigsaw puzzle made it even more appealing to Lisa. She decided she would buy it. The lid was taped securely, which probably meant that all the pieces would still be there. As she carefully climbed down the stepladder, holding the box in both hands, Lisa smiled to herself. It was quite a find, just the sort of thing she had always hoped to discover while rummaging through second-hand stores. The owner of the store came out of the back room as she was walking up to the sales desk. He looked curiously at the box when Lisa set it down. "And where did you find that?" he asked her. Lisa pointed to where she had set up the stepladder. "It was on top of that bookcase. You could barely see it from the floor."
"Well, I've never seen it before, that's for sure,"
the man said.
"Can't imagine how you found it."
Lisa was more pleased than ever about her find. She felt as though the puzzle had been hiding up there, waiting for her to discover it. She paid the 25 cents he asked for the puzzle and wrapped it carefully in the newspapers he gave her to take it home in. It was late on a Saturday afternoon. Lisa lived alone in a small room in an old apartment house. She had no plans for Saturday night, so now she decided to spend the whole evening working on the puzzle. She stopped and bought some meat, bread, and cheese for sandwiches. She would eat while she put the puzzle together. As soon as she had climbed the flight of stairs to her room and put away the groceries, Lisa cleaned off the big table in the center of the room and set the box down on it. The strangest jigsaw puzzle in the world. Lisa read the words again. She wondered what that could mean. How strange could a jigsaw puzzle be? The tape that held the lid down was still strong. Lisa got out a kitchen knife to slice through it. When she lifted the cover off the box, a musty smell came from inside, but the jigsaw pieces all looked in good condition. Lisa picked one up. The color was faded, but the picture was clear. She could see the shape of a finger in the piece. It looked like a woman's finger. Lisa sat down and started to lay out the pieces, top side up on the large table. As she took them from the box, she sorted out the flat-edged pieces from the inside ones. Every so often, she would recognize something in one of the pieces. She saw some blonde hair, a window pane, and a small vase. There was a lot of wood texture in the pieces, plus what looked like wallpaper. Lisa noticed that the wallpaper in the puzzle looked a lot like the wallpaper in her own room. She wondered if her wallpaper was as old as the Jigsaw Puzzle. It would be an incredible coincidence, but it could be the same. By the time Lisa had all the pieces laid out on the table, it was 6:30. She got up and made herself a sandwich. Already, her back was beginning to hurt a little from leaning over the table, but she couldn't stay away from the puzzle. She went back to the table and set her sandwich down beside her. It was always like that when she did jigsaws. Once she started, she couldn't stop until the puzzle was all put together. She began to sort the pieces according to color. There were dark brown pieces, whitish pieces, the wallpaper pieces, and some that seemed to be like glass, perhaps a window. As she slowly ate her sandwich, Lisa pieced together the border. When she was finished, she knew she had been right about the setting of the picture when she had first seen the puzzle. It was a room. One side of the border was wallpaper. Lisa decided to fill that in first. She was curious about its resemblance to her own wallpaper. She gathered all the pieces together that had the blue and lilac flower design. As she fit them together, it became clear that the wallpaper in the puzzle was identical to the wallpaper in her room. Lisa glanced back and forth between the puzzle and her wall. It was an exact match. By now, it was 8:30. Lisa leaned back in her chair. Her back was stiff. She looked over at her window. The night was black outside. Lisa got up and walked over to the window. Suddenly, she felt uneasy, alone in the apartment, and she pulled the white shade down. She paced around the room once, trying to think of something else she might do other than finish the puzzle, but nothing else interested her, so she went back and sat down at the table. Next, she started to fill in the lower right-hand corner. There was a rug and then a chair. This part of the puzzle was very dark. Lisa noticed uneasily that the chair was the same shape as one sitting in the corner of her room, but the colors didn't seem exactly the same. Her chair was maroon. The one in the puzzle seemed almost black. Lisa continued to fill in the border toward the middle. There was more wallpaper to finish on top. The left-hand side did turn out to be a window. Through it, a half-moon hung in a dark sky. But it was the bottom of the puzzle that began to bother Lisa. As the pieces fell into place, she saw a picture of a pair of legs crossed underneath a table. They were the legs of a young woman. Lisa reached down and ran her hand along one of her legs. Suddenly, she felt as though something was crawling up it, but it must have been her imagination. She stared down at the puzzle. It was almost 3/4 done. Only the middle remained. Lisa glanced at the lid to the puzzle box. The strangest jigsaw puzzle, she shuddered. Lisa leaned back in her chair again. Her back ached. Her neck muscle was tense and strained. She thought about quitting the puzzle completely. It scared her now. She stood up and stretched. Then she looked down at the puzzle on the table. It looked different from the higher angle. Lisa was shocked by what she saw. Her body began to tremble all over. It was unmistakable. The picture in the puzzle was her own room. The window was placed correctly in relation to the table. The bookcase stood in its exact spot against the wall. Even the carved legs of the table were the same. Lisa raised her hand to knock the pieces of the puzzle apart. She didn't want to finish it. She didn't want to find out what the hole in the middle of the puzzle might turn out to be. But then she lowered her hand. Perhaps it was worse not to know. Perhaps it was worse to wait and wonder. Lisa sank back down into the chair at the table. She fought away the fear that crept into the sore muscles of her back. Deliberately, piece by piece, she began to fill in the hole in the puzzle. She put together a picture of a table on which lay a jigsaw puzzle. This puzzle inside the puzzle was finished, but Lisa couldn't make out what it showed. She pieced together the young woman who was sitting at the table, the young woman who was herself. As she filled in the picture, Her own body slowly filled with horror and dread. It was all there in the picture. The vase filled with blue cornflowers, her red cardigan sweater, the wild look of fear in her own face. The jigsaw lay before her, finished except for 2 adjoining pieces. They were dark pieces, ones she hadn't been able to fit into the area of the window. Lisa looked behind her. The white blind was drawn over the window. With relief, she realized that the puzzle picture was not exactly like her room. It showed the black night behind the window pane and a moon shining in the sky. With trembling hands, Lisa reached for the second to last piece. She dropped it into one of the empty spaces. It seemed to be half a face, but not a human face. She reached for the last piece. She pressed it into the small hole left in the picture. The face was complete. The face in the window. It was more horrible than anything she had ever seen or dreamed. Lisa looked at the picture of herself in the puzzle, and then back at that face. Then she whirled around. The blind was no longer down over her window. The night showed black through the window pane. A half moon hung low in the sky. And Lisa screamed. The face was there too. Long ago, a small village was plagued by a monster. The monster had never been seen nor heard. It never left tracks or evidence. The only proof of its existence was its victims. The victims were always killed in the same manner. 10 jagged holes would be found in their necks. At first, the monster attacked only small animals. A farmer woke one morning to find that 3 of his sheep had bled to death. Then, 3 pet dogs in the village were found dead, with the same strange claw marks in their necks. Rumors circulated in the village. Everyone heard about the animals, but no one could give a logical explanation for what had killed them. Next, a young calf was found dead. It had bled to death too, its jugular vein punctured by the 10 mysterious holes. After this, men began to arm themselves. Shotguns were set beside beds at night. Animals were kept locked inside the barns. Throughout the village, a rash of hysteria broke loose. People put forth all kinds of wild speculation, and neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. Then it happened, what everyone had really feared. The monster attacked a human, Elmer Riley, the town drunk. Elmer was found dead one morning, with the 10 claw holes in his neck. He had died just like the sheep and the dogs and the calf. He had bled to death. Not many people in the town really cared that Elmer was dead, but it scared them to know that the monster had an appetite for humans as well. Anyone could be its prey. The men of the village banded together to form a vigilante group. They didn't know what they were fighting, which made things even worse. 2 brothers, Robert and John Harmon, were appointed head of the vigilante committee. They lived on the outskirts of the village, near the forest where most people thought the monster lived. The 2 brothers knew how the monster attacked. It had been their calf that was killed. After the first meeting of the vigilante committee, Robert and John Harmon went home to discuss their plans. They sat around the oak table in the kitchen with their father. Their old grandmother sat by the fireplace on a low chair, her black shawl wrapped around her. "We must begin the watch tonight," Robert said in a low voice. "The other men are afraid to act now, but I think tonight is the time to be on guard." "You're right," his brother agreed. "The thing, whatever it is, strikes every 5 days. It was 5 nights ago that Elmer Riley was killed." "You boys sound brave," their father interrupted. "But remember what you are dealing with. The thing seems to attack without warning. In the killing so far, there were no signs of struggle. How will you know what to watch for? The father paused and looked over at his old mother sitting by the fireplace. They should be careful, shouldn't they, Granny? The old woman looked up at her son. She shuddered for a moment and then fell silent again. The three men went back to their conversation. They hadn't really expected to get an answer from her. Her mind had been foggy for years. Robert began to outline his plan for his father. John and I will both take our guns to the outskirts of the forest tonight. We'll set ourselves up on the path between the forest and the village. If the monster comes out tonight, it'll have to pass by either one of us. And what protection will you have? The father asked worriedly. Each other, Robert answered. We'll stay within shouting distance of each other, and we'll keep our backs to the village so that we face the forest and the monster. Someone has to do it, John said next to his father. We don't know who the next victim will be. We can't just sit back and let the monster kill us off one by one. Their father stood up from the table and walked a lap around the room. Then he shook each of their hands. Please come back to me alive, he said, his voice choking. The two sons picked up their rifles from the floor. Robert pulled a long, sharp machete from off the wall. As they left the room, both of them walked over to their old grandmother and kissed her goodbye. Outside, the night was nearly pitch black. A thin sliver of a moon hung low in the western sky. They walked east, toward the forest. As they drew near to where they had planned to station themselves, John whispered, I wonder what it looks like. I've been thinking, Robert said, that it could be a bird. A giant bird that swoops down on you and digs its claws into your neck. They both looked up into the night sky. Clouds were shrouding the thin moon. It would be hard to see a dark shadow descending through the sky. I thought it might tunnel under the ground like a huge weasel, John said softly. Then it comes out and attacks you from behind. Both brothers felt the skin crawl on the backs of their necks. Slowly they turned around and looked behind them. For several minutes they stood there like that in the dark, paralyzed by their own horrible thoughts. We must take our places, Robert said finally. But remember, stay within shouting distance. The two brothers moved off in opposite directions. They had agreed to take 20 long paces and then stop. Standing in the dark, Robert carefully cocked his gun. Then he took the machete and stuck it in the soft ground by his feet, and waited. 40 paces away, John fumbled nervously with his gun. He felt his hands shaking. Could he use the gun if he had to? He wished he could see Robert, but his brother was obscured by the dark shadows of bushes and trees. John turned around to look toward the village. He wished he were safe inside the house. Then he heard the crackling of a twig in back of him. He spun around to face the forest but saw nothing and heard no more. John relaxed. He set the butt of his gun down on the ground and leaned against it, and he started to feel drowsy. And then he felt the 10 claws digging into his neck. A terrified scream echoed through the forest to Robert. He grabbed his gun and machete and followed the awful screams to his brother. He drew near but couldn't see anything in the dark night. But then he heard John's voice, choking and desperate. Quick! Swing the machete behind where you hear my voice! Hurry! Robert threw down his gun, grasping the machete in both hands. He swung it above his head and let it fall. It made a hacking sound before it hit the ground. John had been groaning the whole time, but now he stopped. For an instant, Robert thought he had killed his brother. But then John started to babble incoherently. Robert thought he heard something moving back away from them. It sounded like a giant rat scuttling over the dead leaves. But he could not see it. He fell down on the ground by his brother's body. Moaning again, John took his brother's hand and put it up to his own neck. Robert shrunk back at what he felt. It was a hand, a withered hand with sharp, pointed claws. He had hacked it off the monster with his machete, and it was still stuck inside of John's neck. Robert jerked the foul claws from his brother's neck and bound the 10 bloody holes with his handkerchief. He carried his brother back to the village, leaving the withered hand lying on the forest floor. Their father met them at the door, weeping with fear. He had heard John's terrified screams in the forest. Now he wept with happiness to see that both his sons were alive yet. They laid John out on the couch and washed out the claw marks in his neck. They could see that a few seconds more and the claws would have killed him. As he bandaged his brother's neck, Robert thought about the monster. He hoped it was in the forest now, dying a slow death. All this time, no one had noticed that the old woman was gone from her spot by the fireplace. And no one noticed when she came in through the back door and sat down there again. From her low seat, she looked over to Robert and John. No one heard the hiss that came from her wrinkled mouth, and no one saw the bloody stump that she hid underneath her black shawl.